Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride. And this evening we're going to be showing you a special long interview I did with Linda Fabiani, MSP, this afternoon, talking about her long career in politics and all the things that she's done during that time. But we start this evening with the news headlines, and we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 712,321 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 688,545 were confirmed negative, 23,776 were positive. There were 203 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, one new reported death. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. We do urge you, of course, if you're experiencing a fever, a new persistent dry cough, or a change in your sense of taste and smell, then you do please book a test as quickly as you can. It also helps if you download the new app to track and trace where you are. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 61 people in hospital last night, 5 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,502. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 41,732 patients who tested positive have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 27 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, though, not just those in hospitals. The UK government is facing legal action over their Moonshot project, which could involve up to £100 billion being spent on an attempt to increase COVID-19 testing capacity to 10 million per day. Health Secretary Matt Hancock and the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Michael Gove, are named in a case that alleges that the project, as described in leaked papers, is unlawful because it ignores scientific evidence, involves potentially huge private contracts that may not have been tendered, and breaks the government's own value for money rules. The legal action is the latest in a series of challenges aimed at government handling of the COVID-19 crisis by the Good Law Project, a not-for-profit membership body that has issued proceedings about the award of contracts for personal protective equipment. The First Ministers of Scotland and Wales have attacked Boris Johnson for failing to speak to them directly about the possibility of a new national lockdown in England. Mark Drakeford, the Welsh First Minister, said there was a vacancy at the heart of the UK government and argued that his country's border with England made it crucial for the Prime Minister to communicate directly with him regularly. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon backed Drakeford, saying the UK was at the most critical point of decision-making since March, and called for a COBRA meeting involving the heads of all 4 nations to be convened immediately. Drakeford added that he had only spoken to the Prime Minister once since the end of May, while Sturgeon said she could not remember the last time she spoke with him. Families with children have experienced greater financial pressure and mental health worries during the coronavirus pandemic than those without, according to analysis commissioned by the Scottish Government. The report, which captures parental anxieties during lockdown, was published yesterday amid growing concerns that the guidance on socialising has a disproportionate impact on poorer children. The poll, conducted by Ipsos Mori between the 27th of April and the 3rd of May, found that respondents with children in their household were more likely than those without to have difficulties paying their rent or mortgage, 10% compared with 5%, to have a lower income than usual, and to be worried more about their own and others' mental health. Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya today demanded an international mission to document what she called atrocities during crackdowns on anti-government protests, but also said that she was ready to talk to end weeks of violence. She was addressing a highly charged debate on the Belarus crisis at the UN Human Rights Council, where envoys from Belarus and Russia faced off against EU delegates who are pushing for sanctions and investigations. UN rights investigator Anne Marin told the session that member states needed to act to prevent a major geopolitical rift, Let's not allow another Iron Curtain to descend on the European continent, she said. A British COVID-19 test known as DNA Nudge that gives results in just over an hour and which requires no laboratory was accurate in almost all cases, an academic review in The Lancet has found. Faster testing could allow more people to return to work or permit testing on entry to hospital, thus slowing a second spike in coronavirus infections. In a study in The Lancet Microbe, the test was found to an average sensitivity, the ability to correctly identify those with COVID-19, of 94.4%, and a specificity, correctly identifying those without the disease, of 100%. The test was approved for use in April, and rollout to hospitals and other facilities is currently under review. On International Equal Pay Day, the SNP's Women and Equality spokesperson has said it is more important than ever to close the gender pay gap because the coronavirus pandemic has widened it. Anne McLaughlin MP has tabled an early day motion at Westminster, expressing concern that progress on the pay gap may be lost due to the pandemic, and urged the UK government to take immediate, tough action to close the gap. McLaughlin has also noted that a decade of austerity has had a disproportionate impact on women that must be addressed. Following reports that Scotland's biggest private landowner is set to pay back furlough money, SNP MP Drew Hendry has called on the Chancellor to do the right thing and reinvest these unexpected returns into additional support for small businesses and others who may have fallen through the gaps of existing support. Wildland Limited, owned by Danish billionaire Anders Holch Poulsen, has arranged to pay back £296,000 to the Treasury after the furlough cash helped the company stay afloat during lockdown. Mr. Hendry has said such windfalls must be redirected to help those who have struggled the most to cope with COVID restrictions. High-growth startup companies and university spin-out projects will receive grants to help them grow in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Part of a £3 million package of support from the Scottish Government, the funding provides grants of up to £50,000 for 41 high-growth potential startups and up to £130,000 for 16 spin-out projects. It also includes bespoke support to help the businesses develop. And finally, patients and clinicians have welcomed the expansion of virtual medical and mental health appointments following the coronavirus outbreak, according to a survey. The Near Me video system, originally designed to serve rural communities, was scaled up in March to ensure patient and staff safety during the pandemic. Of 5,400 responses to the survey, 87% of the public backed video consultations, while 94% of clinicians favoured a digital-first approach. So that is all the headlines for today. And now we go to this interview with Linda Fabiani. So I'm joined now by Linda Fabiani, MSP, the SNP representative for East Kilbride, and one of the MSPs who has been in the Parliament since it began in 1999. So Linda, how are you today?
I'm absolutely fine. The sun's shining in East Kilbride, so all's well.
Lovely. Well, I'd like to start. Today, obviously, is the 6th anniversary of the independence referendum in 2014. And I wondered, you've had a long career in politics. You've been in the Parliament since 1999 and in the party for longer than that. So how did it feel after all that time when independence felt like a very distant goal to finally have the vote on the table?
Oh my. It's all a bit of a blur actually, Kenny, because we were so busy, it meant so much, and trying to convince everybody that they should have a stake in their own future and make their own decisions. So when I think back round about that time, I have a haze of memories rather than any particular one. But the feeling, it was another stepping stone on the road to independence, which I'm absolutely convinced is coming close. And that was another stepping stone. Started with the 97 referendum saying that Scotland's Parliament would be reconvened, which it was in 99. And then the move towards that independence referendum. So that day was it was just astounding. It was a culmination of so many hopes and fears, because there was a worry too. What happened after the referendum was astounding, and I think that the confidence it brought to Scotland is a huge factor on where we are now in the opinion polls.
Well, we will talk a wee bit about what's happened since then in a minute, but just looking back on it, what was your experience of the campaign? Was it enjoyable for you? Did you feel like you were making converts every day?
Yeah, I was working very locally. I was hardly out of East Kilbride at all. I went and did the occasional national hustings, stuff like that. But I was out and about in East Kilbride all the time. Sometimes went to Hamilton, which was a big deal. But yeah, I did. There was a great excitement around. It wasn't all easy. I did some very difficult hustings. I did some hostile events. But all in all, it was an absolute pleasure. I always enjoyed campaigning, so yes, I did enjoy it. Yeah, it's good memories, apart from the result, I
Well,
guess.
yeah, I was going to ask about that. Which were you at a count, and how did that evening go? How did you feel as you saw the results start to roll
Uh,
in?
yeah, I was at the count in East Kilbride. Um, it was a strange one because there was a very positive feeling, and myself and the other Yes activists felt very positive about what was happening in East Kilbride, what was happening in Lanarkshire. And of course, East Kilbride returned a yes vote. But I remember the first the first thing we got, I think, was Clackmannan from memory, and getting a real downer by that result. And then a few other results started to come in, and yeah, the elation very quickly turned to dread, and then ultimately disappointment. Yeah, yeah, it was hard.
And so, looking back, I mean, this is maybe a very difficult question, but is there anything that you think you or the campaign could have done differently that would have made that big enough difference?
Oh, I think I've just asked myself that so often. You do that after every campaign. There's always things that you wish you'd done better. Could we have done it differently? Yes, undoubtedly we could have. Would it have returned a yes vote? I'm not so convinced about that. Perhaps people just weren't ready. I think we were really up against it. I mean, the establishment, the UK establishment, just really turned up the heat. And then, of course, it culminated in the vow, which was broken, of course, fairly shortly afterwards. I know all about that, having been on the Smith Commission, etc. So, yes, we undoubtedly could have done things differently. Whether it would have changed that result, I'm not as convinced.
So, as you said, the fallout from the referendum is still with us in a lot of ways. You mentioned the Smith Commission, which was announced almost immediately after the vote. And then in subsequent years, we've seen one Holyrood election, three Westminster elections, the Brexit referendum. It does seem like we've had kind of a lifetime of politics in the last 6 years. What do you think have been the big changes in British and Scottish politics during that time?
Well, I mentioned earlier about a raising in confidence in Scotland. I think both the SNP winning the 2007, 2011, and then, of course, 2016 election and being the government in Scotland, coupled with the democracy that was the independence referendum, and of course the votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, I think that was a huge issue. And all that goes towards the confidence of Scotland, which makes people realise that they do actually have choices, that they can make their own decisions. And if you then add into that mix the complete ignoring of Scotland's wishes over the EU referendum, and then the disaster that is Westminster politics. I believe all these changes are things which are changing a lot of the don't know people into yes people because they believe we really can do things better.
And we've seen, especially at Westminster, but also in the wider world with Trump, for example, Erdogan, Putin, Orban in Hungary, we've seen this rise of authoritarian, autocratic, and sometimes willfully dishonest leaders around the world. What do you think is behind that here? And do you think that's part of a global thing, or is this just a coincidence that this crowd of people have risen to the top in the last few years?
Well, I think when you get one of these very powerful people movements that has a significance globally becoming successful, it then attracts others. I think if you add into that the nasty rhetoric that we've been hearing, whether it's about asylum seekers, refugees, migration, whether it's authoritarian in terms of freedom of the press, and not, even just like Trump does, the constant wearing away at the press, calling them fake, and all this talk about fake news, etc. I think these things get a bit of a groundswell. So no, I don't think it's coincidence. I think there's something very eerie about it. I'm horrified by American politics at the moment. I'm also horrified at some of the politics across mainland Europe and indeed in the UK, because you look at what's happening in the UK and there's all this chaos going on, and you think to yourself, wait a minute, is this chaos deliberate? And then you look at what's happening behind some of that chaos that people aren't talking much about, things slipping through. And it becomes very, very worrying. And you start to think, well, it might be all part of the plan to take away rights. And Scotland's certainly having rights taken away from us. So, no, I don't think it's coincidental. I think there's a level of power which decides what way they want things to be and also wish to stay in power. You hear that old, I can't remember who actually said it, but you hear this saying that power corrupts, but somebody did say at one point it's actually the thought of losing power that corrupts, and I've always felt that to be very, very true. They get high on the power kick, think they know best, telling everybody what to do. And there's an awful lot of that in the world at the moment.
So obviously, as an SNP activist for a huge part of your life, you've never had the highest opinion of Westminster and the British political system. But do you think these changes that we've seen, particularly since the Brexit vote, of this just riding roughshod over constitutional norms and things like that, do you think that's just the Westminster system kind of coming out of the closet and saying, well, this is the way things have always been, really? Or do you think there has been a fundamental change?
Oh my goodness, you're asking really hard questions.
That's my job.
I know. Fundamental change. Well, one of the issues with Westminster for many, many years has been that it is the establishment that runs it. And it doesn't actually matter which party's in power. There's this level of establishment figures that always get their own way, and they swap power every now and then. Things largely stay the same. However, I think this current Tory government is a bit different. They've step changed it. And they, to me, very self-centredly, are looking after themselves and their own, and to heck with everybody else. So I do think that's a change. I think the Westminster system is broken in terms of democracy because the Four Nations stuff just doesn't work. It's one large nation. And this particular government has decided how the three smaller ones will be dealt with. And very, very dismissive about that. So I think there has been a step change in that, a very unhealthy step change. That's not to say that there are people elected in any parliament, and that includes the UK one, that are there to do the best they can. But I think they're being ignored as well now. And there is a top drawer of those in power who are riding roughshod over them as well as everyone else.
Now, I will come back to the whole independence discussion, but I just want to ask just now, with the way that the UK government recently, just in the last couple of weeks, has said that ultimately the law doesn't matter to it, that it will do what it wants, when it wants, how it wants, and to hang with the rest of the world. Do you think that the idea that refusing to cooperate with a referendum because it would be politically untenable is still enough to force the UK government into cooperating, or do you think that this government is different and would still just resist Scottish democracy?
I think they will resist it as long as it's feasible for them. However, if it's very, very plain that there's a clear majority of people in Scotland who want to have the right of democracy and the right to have an independence referendum, that becomes very, very hard to resist in international terms as well as domestic terms. So it's not just about those who want independence. It's about those who believe in the democratic right of a people to have their choice. And that's where I think the Labour Party in particular, as well as the other parties in Scotland, have to step up to the mark and recognise that democracy is precious. Regardless of what you think the constitutional settlement of your country should be, democracy is very, very precious. And when I see some, not all, some Labour Party people, particularly in power, denying the right of democracy for people in Scotland or people in Wales or people in Northern Ireland to have a referendum to determine their own future, they really ought to have a good hard look at themselves. That applies too to the Lib Dems, who are not quite as powerful in Scotland and the rest of the UK as Labour are. Applies to them too. And it also applies to the Conservatives. There's a lot of old Conservatives of the old school who would not deny people's democratic rights. So they've got to step up to the mark too. And I think that tide will become unstoppable. And there will be a referendum. And that's the point where we have to be convincing people that Scotland should be going it alone, making our own decisions like any other normal country. And then deciding how the future of our country goes. You know, there's a lot of talk just now about what the Scottish Government should do, what Scotland should be, what kind of country Scotland would be as independent. We can't do any of that until we're independent. So we've all got to pull together and insist on democracy and achieve independence.
Well, we will come back to the independence question, but you're standing down at the election next year. There's a number of people who have been in the Parliament for all this time who are standing down. So I wanted to just look back at your career a wee bit. Now, the most immediate thing, maybe the last big job you'll have in politics, is the chairing of the inquiry that you're doing just now. And I wondered, obviously there's only so much you can say about it, but just generally, how is that going? Are you finding it easy? Are you finding it interesting? And do you think it will be easy to bring the SNP back together after that inquiry comes to a conclusion?
Well, the SNP isn't apart for a start. So there's no need to bring it back together. You know, the SNP, in a very democratic way, we have internal arguments. Of course, we do regularly, but my goodness, we're tight about what we want to achieve for Scotland. Yes, it's difficult chairing this inquiry. I sometimes think to myself, what on earth did I do in a past life to deserve this? It's certainly not easy. And part of that is about the perception and expectation that people have of it. It was an inquiry that was set up by the Parliament with cross-party votes of the Parliament. It's got a very tight remit. And that remit is to look at the actions of the Scottish Government in relation to harassment complaints against Mr. Salmond. It's not about rerunning a trial. It's not about putting people in the dock and saying, you did this, you did that, you're bad, whatever. It's about clearly looking at the actions of the Scottish Government in relation to these complaints and in relation to the ministerial code. So that's become quite difficult because the remit is very, very clear. And we also have the constraints of the law, you know, in what is acceptable to be discussing and what's not acceptable to be discussing. And sometimes that's quite hard to get over to the general public. So I'm either a great person by shutting down certain lines of inquiry, or I'm a real nasty person that is trying to stop discussion. So it depends on the viewer's perspective, really. But all I can do is do my job, Kenny, you know, and be fair. And that's about being fair to everyone. And I'll keep it that, because I absolutely believe in fairness and impartiality in these things.
And of course, Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond are both people that you've worked with closely for a long time now.
Yeah.
Do you worry that this will affect your personal relationships with them?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't worry about that at all. Because both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon know how these things work. They totally accept that if you're given a job to do, you do it to the best of your ability. And as long as you can be seen to be fair, that's the job. And these two folks, above anybody else, completely understand that.
Okay. Well, I'd like to take a wee look at your career kind of from a maybe a wider angle now. Looking back, you've had 20 years in the Parliament. What are the highlights? What are the moments that really stand out for you as perhaps personal victories, things that you've worked on that you felt you'd really achieved something, or maybe historical moments, things that you think are really kind of defining moments in Scotland's history?
Oh, gosh. I suppose the first big job I volunteered for and took on was to be on the sort of oversight panel committee for the Parliament building. It was called the Progress Group. Certainly wasn't easy, because these early days of the Parliament were very difficult. I took that on and I stuck with it. I was the only member of that group that stuck with it from start to finish. So I suppose I got a name, a reputation for perseverance. So a huge highlight for me was moving into the new Parliament building at Holyrood and seeing very quickly how much people liked it, whether it was as a space to work in or a place to visit. So that was a big highlight for me. We achieved it, we got there, and it worked out. So that was a highlight. Coming into government, SNP taking government in 2007 under Alex Salmond, a minority government, that was huge, absolutely huge. And I had the honour of being in Alex's ministerial office for 2 years, doing Europe, external affairs and culture. So that was a huge highlight, because that's when we really started to promote Scotland, not just tamp Scotland down as part of the UK. Remember Tony Blair referred to Holyrood as a parish council or whatever, and sometimes it felt as if the unionist parties were trying to keep it at that. So we very quickly changed it to the Scottish Government as an example of the importance of our national Parliament. So that was an honour, a thrill, huge. Holding government in 2011 and getting a majority against all the odds was another big highlight. Chairing the Scotland Bill Committee that was cross-party, that was a difficult path to negotiate, but we got additional powers for the Parliament through that, so that was big. The Smith Commission, again, that was an honour to be asked by Nicola Sturgeon to go on that with John Swinney. It wasn't easy. We didn't get everything we achieved, but I firmly believe that our taking part in that made a difference to Scotland's powers and how we could move forward, because we got a small degree of welfare powers, for example, which we are now seeing the benefit of in terms of child poverty stuff. So that would be a big achievement for me as well. We also got in the Smith Commission the declaration that Scotland had the right to determine its own future. And a lot of people forget that that's actually there. That nothing in that agreement precludes the right of Scotland to decide its own future. And we've got to keep holding on to that. And it's there, and it's in black and white in the Smith Agreement. And what's not in black and white in any agreement is this nonsense about once in a generation that they keep coming up with. What's there in black and white is the right to determine our own future, if the people of Scotland so choose.
So, what do you think are the kind of wider changes that have happened in Scotland since the devolution began? What are the big kind of social changes that you've seen in that time, and what impact do you think devolution has had more generally?
I think that the social impact that we're seeing is not enough. Of course, it's not enough. We've got some welfare powers, but when you look at the things that stay with Westminster, it's just small. All we can do is tinker around the edges. Unfortunately, because of the government that is in Westminster just now, which I think is probably a harder government than any other would have been, we're having to ameliorate an awful lot of the excesses that they've done in welfare, with the introduction of some of the welfare reforms. So a lot of what we should have been able to do, we haven't been able to do because we're having to fill the gaps quite often. But things like the Scottish Welfare Fund, for example, we've been able to help people out with that. Some of the Best Start grant payments for children who are starting school, able to do that. Things like the baby box. For some people, that's absolutely huge. And it's universal. That's a universal benefit that everyone gets. We've managed, to maintain things like free eye tests, free dental care, free prescriptions, no tuition fees. These are all really big things that we've achieved in Scotland. One of the frustrations I have is that we never hear enough about what Scotland is doing compared to other parts of the UK. And I know, speaking to Welsh friends, that the Welsh Assembly has done some things as well, and they get frustrated by that as well. And it's back to that age-old argument about things getting put out in the media that actually don't refer to Scotland, don't refer to Wales, don't refer to Northern Ireland. So I think we have done what we can in terms of looking after people in Scotland. I'm just not sure that we always get the message across as well as we should be able to, and that's a constant frustration for me.
Now, stepping away from your role as a political representative, you've also, on a number of occasions, been an observer for other elections around the world. I wonder if you could just tell us a wee bit about that. How did you get involved in that, and why? And what have you got out of that?
Oh my! I suppose the main one I would talk about is my involvement with Timor-Leste, or East Timor, as it's called. How did I get involved? My big mouth, the usual. I was on a radio programme way back, 99, in fact, one of these late night talk things, and I was up against it by unionist politicians who were all having a go at Alex Salmond over his stance in Kosovo. And of course, I got up my high horse and, said to them, "You've got a blooming nerve having a go at anybody. Your duplicity in global relations. You're sitting here talking about humanitarian aid and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, you're selling arms to countries across the world that are oppressing and bombing others." And I mentioned East Timor. Lo and behold, within a few months, I was on my way to East Timor to be an election observer, courtesy of Glasgow students at Glasgow University, in fact, who had a Timor support group. Anyway, cut a long story short, I've ended up with what I consider family in East Timor. And so I'm a granny to three beautiful children in Timor-Leste. So my plan on retirement is to get out there for a few months and stay with the family. So what have I had out of it? I've had a family, a ready-made family. I don't have children myself, but over the last 20 years, I've had a succession of family from Timor-Leste who've come to Scotland, studied, and unlike what you hear so much, that nasty rhetoric you get about immigrants, my lads, all they want to do is go back and help their own country, you know. So that's the reality of most people who come here. They would actually rather be at home, but sometimes the situation at home is not always conducive.
And is that something that you think you might do again if the opportunity arose in your retirement? Do you think there's a role for you there in perhaps observing other elections?
I don't know. People always say to me, "What are you going to do when you retire?" And I'm just like, nothing. you know, obviously, I'll keep fighting for independence for Scotland. And when the referendum comes up again, I'll be there in the front line. Of course, I will. What will I do beyond that? I'm not going to do anything for the sake of doing it, Kenny. It would have to be something that I cared passionately about and really wanted to do. So I'm not going to go traipsing around the world doing things just because I think I would be great at it or anything like that. But if it's something I really care about, if it's something I really care about, whether it be locally or whether it be elsewhere in the world, I would help if I could. Yeah.
And we're talking about international affairs. You mentioned that you had a time in cabinet doing external affairs. What do you think? How do you think Scotland's international reputation has changed in the years that you've been in politics?
I think there's a recognition of Scotland as a very distinct nation, as opposed to a part of North Britain which has certain symbols like bagpipes and whiskey. I think there's much more of a recognition of Scotland as somewhere that is very distinct, has its own government. I think Nicola Sturgeon has been wonderful for that. She's recognised across the world as a leader and a respected leader. So I would say that's how global perception of Scotland has changed. And that's all to the good. That's all to the good. We're a small nation. It means we can be very distinct. We can be fleet of foot and get involved in different things and make our mark. But we're no smaller than an awful lot of other nations within the European Union and beyond that do very, very well. I think we've made a lot of friends in different places in the world in our own distinct right as a nation. And that's been hugely important.
And as we said, you are standing down at the May election. But in kind of global political terms, you're still relatively young. The two men running for the US presidency this year are 10 to 15 years older than you. Uh, did you just feel that you'd had enough, or that you didn't have the energy to keep going for another 4 or 5 years, or what was the decision making process like?
Well, I, uh, I really believe you've got to know when to go. uh, I'm always uncomfortable when I just see folk hanging on. Um, so there's a few things involved. I'll be 64 at the election. I thought, do I want to commit another 5 years? Now, I find it the only way I can work. I'm trying to say is the only way I can work is full on. If people have a faith in me to represent them, I'm going to do that 24/7. And folks say, and you do get more tired as you get older. And folk have said, oh, you need to slow down. You need to, you know, take some time for yourself, have a rest. And I just find that impossible. You've got to work. So I'm very realistic about that. So I thought another 5 years, I'll be almost 70. Some people are wonderful at that. For me, I don't think I can carry on at the pace I work at for another 5 years. So I didn't think it was fair to the East Kilbride electorate, um, if they elected me again another 5 years. Didn't think it was terribly fair on myself or my family. So, and I'm really, really pleased at the way East Kilbride SNP has built up, and the Yes movement, the independence movement. There's loads of talent there. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that if the SNP uh, win East Kilbride again next year, they'll have an excellent representative. I won't interfere. I'll be happy to be called for any assistance required, but I'll need to be asked. I'm not going to be hanging about. Um, so it was just the right time. And as I say, you've got to know when to go. And for me, it was now.
Now, there are a number of people standing down at this election, long-serving members, and I wonder what you think the difference will be when there is more of a generation in the Parliament who don't really remember a time before devolution, and some perhaps who don't even remember much of a time before the SNP were in government. Do you think that will make a big change, particularly to the SNP, which has been such a minority party for so much of your life, and to have gone from that to being such a big membership, in power, potentially taking over 50% of the vote? Do you think there's a difference in the kind of activists that will be moving in to replace you and some of the others that are retiring?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think there's a responsibility in all of us in the SNP to recognise that that is a question that needs considered. The last election, 2016, we'd quite a high turnover, and we brought in a lot of new people. And it was wonderful to watch them over this last 4.5 years to develop how they developed. And some of them are in government now. In fact, one of them's in cabinet. It's absolutely great. So we'll have another new influx of people this time round, I hope, if we have a very successful election. So that's fabulous. That's a mark of the success of our party, of our government. But we also have to bear in mind that there's a bit of institutional memory that's being lost through that. So that's up to the party generally to recognise and to make sure that our structures like National Assembly, like conferences and things like the general branch politics that we have a respect for people of all levels, all ages and all levels of experience, and utilise that experience.
And now some of the people who are standing down are not, in your age bracket, the likes of Gail Ross, who's standing down. And she's talked about the kind of strain that there's been on her mental health, her family life from being involved in politics. Do you think there are things that the Parliament needs to change to make it easier for people to get in and to stay in and be productive and healthy?
Mm. I'm quite old-fashioned about this stuff, Kenny. Uh, we've started having remote voting and things but because of COVID-19, and that's been absolutely necessary. So yes, that's given us something to think about. However, as I say, I'm quite old-fashioned about this. I don't think that should become the norm. Um, the reality is that people expect their parliamentarians to attend Parliament, maybe not every week, maybe not all the time. So that there could be some kind of mixture of that goes on for particular circumstances. However, one of the things that bothers me, I don't think this is old-fashioned, this is about feminism and everything else. We keep hearing this stuff about it being difficult for women with families and all the rest of it. Therefore, we should do this, do that, and do the next thing. Aye, that's all very well, but when did we start saying it was entirely a woman's responsibility to look after the family? So one of my concerns when we start talking that way is that it becomes the necessary so that women can participate. No, there's responsibility on families for both partners, both mum and dad, to have responsibilities. So I think it's a much wider discussion than it's been narrowed down to in a lot of ways. So I think our parliament is pretty good if you compare it to others. You just have to compare the way Holyrood votes with the way Westminster votes, for example. I mean, I was sitting at home the other night watching on social media as my colleagues in Westminster were going to vote and discuss, and it was like late at night. That's just totally ludicrous. At least in our own parliament, we try very, very hard to have civilised working hours in terms of parliamentary business and voting. Now, that's not to say you're not still working really late or doing other things afterwards. But in terms of the parliamentary business, I think we do rather well. It can be enhanced with some of the things we've learned through this current crisis. But I don't actually believe that we should ever have a 100% remote parliament.
Now, you mentioned women in politics, and I mean, I 100% agree with you that we should stop thinking of child rearing as exclusively a female responsibility. But there are other things that are kind of quite specific barriers for women getting involved in politics. I mean, it can often be quite a chauvinistic space.
Yes.
And virtually any woman in the public eye now gets, barracked on social media, gets a lot of really vile misogynistic abuse. What do you think we can do about that to help make the world just a slightly better place for women to be in the public eye?
Oh, that's a really difficult one. I mean, one of the things I will do when I retire is, well, after I've gone on to Twitter and thrown some insults back at the people that have been me for years, I'm going to come off Twitter. Social media has really thrown up some of the real nasties about what goes on. I'm absolutely horrified at what some of my colleagues, mainly women, get on social media. I haven't had too much, but others have had a terrible, terrible time. And much of it is misogynistic. So I know we've got the hate crime legislation being considered at Parliament just now. Very controversial at the moment, but it's being considered. It was agreed that misogyny would not be part of that and that a panel would be set up to look at misogyny as a crime. And I understand that's ongoing at the moment and it will come back and report. So my hope is that social media will be very much taken on board as part of that. Offensive publications. I mean, we tried to do that before as part of another piece of legislation that ended up being struck off, as you know. However, I think we have to take it very, very seriously because some of it is just vile.
And now, you're not going to be in the Parliament after May. So if we could set independence aside, because I do want to ask about that as well, but setting independence aside for a minute, what are the other big priorities, do you think, for whoever is in government come next May?
Yeah. Well, we haven't seen the extent of the fallout of COVID-19 yet. So there's going to be a lot of work to be done on employment issues and everything that relates into employment issues. So, not just about the economy, but about the well-being of people. So it's a big, big job. Government next time round, it's really going to hit. And I would say it's a responsibility, not just for government, but for the Parliament. Surely, above all else, everyone who gets elected next year will recognise that there's got to be a working together and a stopping of this. Just because the government does it, it must be bad, so let's have a go. I would love to see the next Parliament recognising that there are big issues that need to be addressed and getting together and working collectively to address them. So that would be my hope.
And what do you think are the things that you're going to miss about this life that you've been living for the last 20 odd years?
I'll miss the community involvement. I will still have things to do. I mean, for example, I'm a director of Smart Sustainable East Kilbride in my own right rather than as an MSP. Because I've worked 25 years in East Kilbride now. So I'm a director of Smart Sustainable East Kilbride, which is about repositioning East Kilbride beyond its new town status. So I'll keep on it. That's something. But what I will miss, and I have missed during this last 5-6 months, is the community involvement, the going to schools, the meeting people at the different clubs that are on, and just that general social interaction that's a wonderful part of being a local representative. I'll very much miss that. I'll still have some of it, but not to the extent that I did have. And I'll miss that. I'll miss my pals as well, because there's some folk I've worked with for 20 years now and been with every week. So I will miss my pals too.
And you can take the women out of politics, but you can't necessarily take the politics out of the women. Is there anything that you can see yourself doing? I mean, you mentioned this project in East Kilbride. Is there anything in the political sphere that you can see yourself doing in your retirement?
I don't know. It's like I said earlier, it would have to be something that really, really mattered to me and I wanted to do. I wouldn't rule anything out. If there was some kind of potential public appointment that came up that I thought, I really care about that, I think I could do a very good job on that, I would perhaps apply for it. As I say, not for the sake of it. I would like to get involved in something to do with young people as well. Children's panel stuff, for example, I've always been impressed by those who do work on children's panels, because it's hard work, volunteers. I've had lots of sort of informal offers, I have to say, but I'm not committing to anything until we see where we're at. The next referendum is the most important thing. So.
Well, that was where I wanted to come to now, because we don't have a huge amount of time left. If I were to put you on the spot, what would your prediction be about how the independence movement is going to play out over the next year or so?
Well, the Scottish Government's already working on the referendum bill. So you can't just hold a referendum overnight. I mean, I see in social media folks saying things like, just call a referendum, just do this, just do that. It's not that easy. There's quite rightly laws and rules in place about how you have to run these things. So there's the Electoral Commission, for example, to make sure everything's fair and above board. There's quite a lot of logistics to go through to make sure it's done properly. So a referendum, I would hope, would be within a year of the next Holyrood election. I think we'll win the next referendum. Yeah. So, and then there's more work.
So, do you expect then that the SNP can win a majority next year and that the independence question can be answered? You're not too concerned about the struggle to get to the referendum. It's more a case of once we get it, we're done.
Yeah, I do have confidence that we will win. SNP will win a majority next year. I do have confidence that the groundswell of opinion that says people have the right to have a referendum and choose will win the day. I even have a degree of confidence that the unionist parties in Scotland will recognise that they have to back that right. So, yes. And then I think we can have the referendum, and I believe that we'll win that referendum. And as I say, then the work starts, setting up so much that will need to be done, but so much is there already. That's the thing. The UK or the rest of the UK doesn't own all that's part of the UK. Scotland has a share of that, has paid for it over the years. And so these negotiations can go ahead. So yes, we will be an independent nation and we'll be running our own affairs. I would like to think that we will be part of the European Union as well. So for me, that's all part of our future. Scotland, a European nation.
Mm-hmm. And so just finally, can I take it then that you will be out knocking doors?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Knocking doors, screaming in street corners. Yeah, I'll be doing all of that.
Excellent. Well, Linda Fabiani, thank you very much for your time today. And thank you, obviously, for 20 odd years of dedication to the people of East Kilbride. I'm sure most of them appreciate it very much. So that was Linda Fabiani speaking to us earlier today. And we'd like to thank her again, not just for her time today, but for all the support that she's given to Broadcasting Scotland over the years. She has been one of our friendliest MSPs over that time. And of course, we've talked today about the anniversary of the Scottish independence referendum. Many of you will know that Broadcasting Scotland began as Referendum TV during that campaign, when it was little more than a couple of cameras, a big idea and a lot of ambition. It has grown since then, not least in part thanks to people like Linda who have helped us along the way, but also from a lot of hard work behind the scenes here. So we just want to remind you that distance that we've come, it's still not enough. We do want to go further, we do want to grow more, and we need your help to do that. So if you are able to support us, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is going to make a huge difference in what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. As many of you know, there's been discussions about the BBC this week, and we feel that Broadcasting Scotland can be a better national broadcaster for Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand. The shows will always be free to view online, but you can still make a big difference. You can follow us on Twitter @BroadcastScot. You can find our page on Facebook. You can find our channel on YouTube, where you can subscribe and click the bell icon to make sure that you're updated when we produce new videos. And you can then share those shows around. We rely on your word of mouth to help us spread the word about what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland. So do please share these programmes around. Let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. And finally, we are always talking about this, but we do need more bodies here. There is a lot of work to be done here. It takes a lot of effort to produce these programmes, and we need more people to help us grow. So if you're interested in any way in getting involved in building that better broadcaster, whether it's in front of the camera or behind it, do please get in touch with us as soon as you can. And so that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you again to Linda Fabiani. I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish, but until then, have a great weekend. Goodbye.